There we go. We've got our recording getting started for our TMN Tuesday November event. Welcome to everybody who's joining us live, or if you're watching this recording. We're excited to have Ricky Linex speak to us today. Before Ricky gets his due introduction and gets to give his gospel on land stewardship, which I am so excited to hear from him today. We've got a little quick tech check that we always like to do at the beginning of our TMN Tuesday events. If this is your first TMN Tuesday, do not worry. As an attendee, you cannot unmute or share your video. That is on purpose. We have hundreds of volunteers and members of the Master Naturalist program and public joining us at any of these events. And so we want to make sure that we give Ricky that front and center stage ability to be able to share his information today. The next part of our tech is to make sure that you can hear me. You've now seen us flip a few slides. You see me talking, hopefully. But if you cannot hear us, you cannot hear me telling you to check your audio settings, but hopefully you can see the screen that is telling you where and how to adjust your audio settings, making sure that your speaker is plugged in, turned on, volume turned up. Again, you might not be hearing me telling you that, but hopefully you're reading the screen and getting that adjusted now. The main communication that we'll be using today from our attendees with our presenters, our chat function, and I have many of you introducing yourself in the chat this morning, and that's great. Please keep all of we're going to use that chat function to filter all of our questions and comments that we have for Ricky today. But as always, please be respectful, professional, and on topic with that discussion today as well. Try your best at spelling and grammar and those questions that you put into chat, so Michelle and I as moderators can help to ask the right questions to get you the right answers. And the last little bit on there is make sure that you've got the to everyone selected on your chat so that we all participate in the same discussion. Last but not least in our tech lineup for this morning is our kind of overall concept of our webinar etiquette. We already talked about that attendees are not able to unmute or show their video, but we're going to be using chat function for on-topic professional discussion. Today's webinar will count for 1 hour of advanced training if you are watching this as a live webinar or as a recorded webinar, and this recording will be put on our website, if not by the end of the day today, first thing tomorrow morning. And with that, I'll kick it over to Michelle to introduce the TMN Tuesday event series, talk a little bit about our presenter, and then let Ricky have the floor.
All right. So as mentioned, this is part of our TMN Tuesday event series. As a reminder, and if you're new to our TMN Tuesdays, based on the topic today, we have our TMN Tuesdays the second Tuesday of every month at noon. And this is the advanced training, recorded and advanced training that's offered through our state office. It's always free. It's always available to the public. And this is the only recorded advanced training at this time that is automatically approved for master naturalists to receive advanced training on watching the recordings or live, and always live. We have 2 more sessions left in the year for this 2022 TMN Tuesdays. Today, our November 8th session, and then December 13th coming up. Today, we have Ricky Linex coming to us today to share and talk to us about land stewardship and reading the land, and giving our master naturalists tools for developing a land stewardship ethic. As was mentioned earlier, we are recording this session, and the recording will be on our website. So this is a screen capture of our website here, and the recording will be shared there at the bottom next to Ricky's picture there. And we try to have these available by tomorrow morning. So check back there if you are coming back to the session or sharing the information with your other master naturalist friends who may have missed the session, not able to attend today. They can always watch the recording of all of our advanced training, TMN Tuesday advanced training topics on our website. And just while we have you, to give you a shout out for December and what's coming up in our TMN Tuesday for December. Tentatively, we have Dr. Kenneth Taylor joining us again on covering leadership transitions among transitioning times. And this is the December event is a joint event, our joint TMN Tuesday event with our chapter presidents. It's a joint event with our chapter presidents meetings, and we are inviting all chapter leaders, incoming and outgoing, to attend that session in December, along with our Master Naturalist membership. So a shout out for December coming up. And if you're new to the Master Naturalist program, you aren't yet a member of the program, or you haven't yet been able to get involved with a training to become a volunteer of the Master Naturalist program, let us know if today's your first event, or if you're new to the program. Tell us in the chat. And we welcome you at any time to get involved with the program. Our program is sponsored at the state level by both Texas Parks and Wildlife and Texas A&M AgriLife Extension. Our mission is to develop a core of well-informed volunteers who provide education, outreach, and service dedicated towards the beneficial management of natural resources and natural areas within their communities for the state of Texas. If you're new to the program and you're looking to get involved, the first thing to do is find your local chapter. That is available on the front page of our website. Each of these cells are clickable to find the chapter that's nearest you. Next, find your training date, apply, and become involved. And all of this information is on our website if you're new to the program. You can follow these instructions and suggestions there. And we'll drop this in the chat if you're new to the program and want to follow up on that. Moving back to November's TMN Tuesday, I'm so happy to have back with us our great friend, Ricky Linex. As I mentioned, Ricky will be talking about land stewardship and reading the land and tools for developing a land stewardship ethic. So many of our sessions so far this year have revolved around some management topics and individual species topics. And we're looking forward to Ricky kind of bringing all those topics together and being ethical stewards of the land. Ricky is no stranger to the Master Naturalist program. He's a great friend of the program. You've seen him at many of our advanced training events, mainly the annual meeting. And he had the pleasure of introducing our 2021 recertification pin, which was the Side Oats Grama, state grass of Texas. Ricky is a wildlife biologist, and he worked for over 36 years, Ricky? 37 years with NRCS, and most recently with NRCS, prior to his retirement, he was in charge of stewardship and management and reading the land in over 51 counties of North Texas with the NRCS. So great presenter for you today, and so knowledgeable about land stewardship and ethics. And I'm going to stop sharing and then hand over rights to you, Ricky.
Okay. Here we are. Hope everybody's seeing that all right.
Yes, sir. Looks great.
Okay. Move some boxes around on my end. So welcome everyone. Greetings. Glad to get to visit with you again. I missed the annual conference this year, but hope to be back maybe in 2023. So we're going to combine a couple of topics, stewardship and how to read the land, together, and put it all together where you can see how it develops a land stewardship ethic. And that's what we're going to be covering. I want to give a shout out to a good friend of ours, Steve Nelly. He shared some of the photos and part of his stewardship presentation with me. So we bounced around quite a while, over 30 years working together. He was I was his counterpart, actually. He was the zone wildlife biologist in San Angelo, and I was in Weatherford. And So thanks for all the learning that Steve has given us through the years. Let's first start out defining what is land stewardship, and there's several different definitions. This first one, land stewardship, is the conservation of your property's natural resources and features over a long period of time. So kind of a basic generic statement. Here's another one, managing private property to protect long-term environmental sustainability. We're introducing that word. And here's one, the responsible use, including conservation of natural resources in a way that takes full and balanced account of the interest of society, future generations, and other species, as well as of private needs, and accepts significant answerability to society. So now society is coming into the focus. And another one, it says the concept that helps define appropriate human interactions with the natural world, the land that's out there, the ecosystems that we interact with. And the common thread or theme among most concepts of land stewardship is a person or persons caring for the environment, not for the benefit of themselves, but for future generations, driven by voluntary personal ethics rather than by legal obligations. So these ethics are something inside of you in your heart and soul that you know is either right or wrong. There are hunting ethics, there are ethics in all sports. It's just the difference in right and wrong, doing right. I found this publication, I refer to it quite a bit. The name is down at the bottom, The Explorer's Texas, The Lands and Waters by Dale Winiger. He had a companion book called The Explorer's Texas, The Animals They Found. But this one on lands and water is really a great publication. He researched a lot of old bibliographies and found reference material. And here he found a sketch of Austin, which was a little smaller than it is now, drawn back in 1840. And he said that the writing of this time described that scene around Austin as a prairie. And we probably wouldn't think of that nowadays. And he also referenced that this newspaper, the Texian Advocate, wrote in 1848, the hills which extend all the way from Austin to New Braunfels are covered with heavy timber. And I think we see that heavy timber that was then and that we see now, majority of that was probably ash juniper, along with, hardwoods, oak species, but it was there then and still there 175 years later. So we can learn a lot by looking back at what the early condition of the land was. And I want to give you a story now from this publication. You can find it online as a PDF, Cattle Ranges of the Southwest by H.L. Bentley, Henry Louis Bentley. And this was written in 1898. Mr. Bentley was an agristologist with the U.S. Department of Agriculture, Division of Agristology, and he established a grass station in Abilene, Texas, northwest of Abilene, in the years 1895 through 1898. And then he wrote this summary of what he was seeing. And in some of the writings in this publication, he said that a stockman who traveled with a herd of cattle through San Saba, San Angelo, and Abilene in the summer of 1867, when that country was very sparsely settled, says that grass was everywhere from 1 to 3 feet high, sometimes as high as a cow's back, not only on the bottomlands, but also in places on the drier uplands. We still see good grasses like this stirrup high to a horse on the bottomlands, but he was seeing it in the uplands. But what hit me like a sledgehammer to the head was this statement in yellow. At that time, there is little doubt that the ranges would have supported 300 head of cattle to the square mile. Now, that's a stocking rate of one animal unit, one head of livestock per 2.1 acres. I don't think this was sustainable then. and you'll see that it wasn't. But we don't know what happened prior to this 1867. Were the buffalo that maybe had been in the area, had they moved on and did not return for several years? Had there been several years of above average rainfall? Something that they could see on the land made them think that this land would support grazing at an animal unit to 2 acres, which was not possible. And a few years later, it began to look like this. Look how short this is. This is not an old photo. I just turned it black and white, but it's short on the uplands, short in the riparian areas, overall just overgrazed. And he continues on with his statement. Now, at the end of 30 years, in 1898, almost every condition has changed. The carrying capacity of the land has steadily decreased until it is an exceptional property that can carry 1 head of stock to 5 acres. It is claimed that that was the common average rate 10 years ago. Today, it requires at least 10 acres per head and is often considered not the best policy to put on more than 50 cows to the section of 640 acres. So look at the drop in grazing. In effect, Texas was overgrazed by 1900. So in 1867, 1 head per 2 acres. 20 years later, it had decreased 2.5 fold to 1 head per 5 acres. And then it decreased in 10 years to 1 head in 10 acres. This 12.8 acres comes from dividing 50 cows into 640 acres. So today in central Texas, let's say, depends on where you are in the state, depending on how much brush is on the land as well, but it will take 15 to 50 acres of land to support 1 cow for a full year. Now, this is not feeding hay or feeding cubes. This is 1 cow living off the land. It requires 15 to as much as 50 acres. So that land was just way overgrazed back in the early days. What caused the overgrazing? There was so much grass that really no one bothered to learn even how many different grasses they were, or which were more palatable, which were more valuable. The problems were it was free grass. You know, this country, prior to having to buy the land, it was just free grazing land. And the only expense to a rancher that got there first was the cost of buying cows or rounding up strays on the prairie. And these early ranchers really struck it rich. They were the ones making lots of money. But in the area where this grass station was put in, the railroad did not come through Abilene until 1882. But when it did arrive, it brought in speculators, people from the eastern United States that were coming into Texas looking to invest in land. They didn't know how to graze the land either. I mean, they were coming from areas that had a lot more rainfall. And so they thought, you know, I can run a cow to 5 acres. That's no problem. But that contributed to the overgrazing as well. And weather conditions, you know, we had some bad weather back in the late 1800s, snowstorms, droughts that again resulted in overgrazing and loss of good natural habitat. An arrival of the nester. Now, the nester is a kind of a slang term for a farmer, but these farmers were brought in. Again, a lot of them were sold land from the speculators, and they thought they were being able to get good cropland. Not all of Texas should be in cropland. We do need cropland. We've got to feed people. We've got to grow cotton, grow clothes, basically. But the cropland needs to be on the better land, the deeper soils, not the shallow and rocky soils. So that was a problem as well. And there was an overall lack of interest in range improvement. The study of range management didn't really come about until the 1930s, 1940s, 50 years before this overgrazing was going on, 50 years before that. And there was no drought planting. No one set aside grass to graze when it was going to be, maybe hold that pasture back for save it for drought insurance. They weren't doing that. It was just graze it all, get the best, get the most out of it while they could. And they began to see an increase in these native plants, prickly pear, mesquite, juniper. Yes, these are natives. They were here. Don't believe, the stories that they came in with the early cattle trails coming from Mexico, moving up. They were already here, but fire and prior to the European settlers coming in and grazing it, fires would keep these brush species down. But they did, they were here, and they have spread quite a bit. And I'll show you some photos later about some of this spread of prickly pear. Does this remind you of an event that happened in the 1930s when we mistreated the land? I'm talking about the Dust Bowl. During World War I, there was a push to plow up land, plant it to wheat. There was even slogans. You need to plant wheat, wheat for the war, wheat for the people, wheat to feed the soldiers. And people got in a rush to plow up a lot of the Great Plains. And this continued on even after the war. They were plowing up country, and there was a wet period between the mid 1910s and the 1920s when plowing up some of this marginal cropland worked because there was enough rain. And then we hit the early 1930s and it dried up, and the Dust Bowl, when the farms blew away because those soils were so shallow they should have stayed in grass. But we didn't understand the situation, and we caused that problem. So we still have overgrazing issues, and I'm going to hit overgrazing quite a bit. I'm not against grazing if it's done properly, but this fence line contrast photo, you can see a lot. This photo was taken in the summer of 2011, which was a drought year. You probably remember how bad it was. On this side of the fence, it's grazed with cattle. On this side of the fence, this was actually an old cropland field that was enrolled in the Conservation Reserve Program. You may have heard of the CRP program, Conservation Reserve Program. And this was to take old cropland, marginal cropland, take it out of production, plant it to native grasses and forbs, which would reduce excess commodities and boost the prices that the farmers were getting for their crops. And it's still going on. We still have this program available through the U.S. Department of Agriculture. But look at this fence. It's not very good. And there's one wire on this T-post right here that's kind of holding the fence up. The cattle have pushed through that fence as far as they could reach, trying to get something to eat. But can you blame them? Look at what they've got to eat, yucca and mesquite. So overgrazing problems still exist in the 21st century, just like they did in the 19th century. Now, this gentleman was the first chief of the Soil Conservation Service when it started in 1935. Hugh Hammond Bennett stated that farmers and ranchers have only temporary control over their land. It can be theirs for a lifetime and no longer. The public's interest, however, goes on and on endlessly. If nations are to endure, land must be nurtured, not plundered and wasted. Very wise words. And in the mid 1900s, I was in Abilene. I worked there 14 years. And this gentleman, Dick Atkins, was selected to be Conservation Rancher of the Year by the local Soil and Water Conservation District. And I was tasked with going out there to interview Mr. Atkins. I knew him, and take some photos and get a presentation ready to show that he was the Conservation Rancher of the Year. And one of the quotes that he gave me, and I wrote it down, I lost it, but I've always remembered it, was he said this ranch was known as the Smith place before we bought it, and the Johnson Ranch before that. While our name is on the current land deed, we are just the current caretakers, and we hope to leave it to our kids in better condition than we got it. Now, that was the words of a true steward of the land. Well before stewardship became a buzzword, he was certainly a good manager. He took care of his land, and he was a good steward of the land. You probably heard and read about Aldo Leopold, known as the father of wildlife management. He's quoted quite a bit in the Master Naturalist Handbook. He wrote that all ethics rest upon the single premise that the individual is a member of a community of interdependent parts. The land ethic simply enlarges the boundaries of the community to include soils, waters, plants, animals. Collectively, we call the land. And this is to say that once we understand that humans are not separate from, but are part of and depend upon the natural community, we will develop an ethic to care for the community as a whole. He was a great writer, college professor, like I said, first father of wildlife management. He started the wildlife management industry in 1932. The Sand County Almanac that he wrote, he had submitted that to several publishers and they had turned it down, suggested rewrites and changing chapters and things, and he would do that. And he'd done this for several times. And it was finally accepted in 1948. And sadly, a week after it was accepted by the publisher, Aldo Leopold died from a heart attack while he was fighting a wildfire on a neighbor's piece of property in Wisconsin. And his son took it and made sure it got published, finished all any paperwork, anything like that. And this publication has sold over 2 million copies. It's in 14 different languages, and I don't believe it's ever been out of print since 1948. So if you have not read a Sand County Almanac, you need to get that and read it. And people will read it and read it several times over. Great publication. He also wrote, "It is inconceivable to me that an ethical relation to the land can exist without love, respect, and admiration for land, and a high regard for its value. And by value, I mean something far broader than mere economic value." He also understood that for landowners to be good stewards of the land and to take good care of the land, that they had to receive value for that work, whether this was in growing trees. He planted a lot of trees on his farm, or it could be for grazing value or wildlife value. So he understood the big picture of land stewardship, land management. He said we need to examine each question in terms of what is ethically and aesthetically right, as well as what is economically expedient. We want to look at a big picture. And he said an ethic, ecologically, is a limitation of freedom of actions. So if you have an ethic for the land, you are not going to overgraze the land. And that is a limitation on your freedom. You choose to not overgraze the land. No one makes you take care of the land, and no one makes you overgraze the land. So an ethic is a limitation of freedom of actions. And he said a thing is right when it tends to preserve the integrity, stability, and beauty of the biotic community. It is wrong when it tends otherwise. So all of our actions out there on the land, we could answer them right there with that one paragraph. Is it right or is it wrong because of the way it treats the land? Now, we're going to change from talking about land stewardship to talking about reading the land, sort of like looking through a crystal ball, seeing your land and what's going on with that land. Now, we have different uses of our lands. This couple on the left, they enjoy raising livestock, and if you enjoy that lifestyle, that's what you're going to enjoy doing, spending your time on, taking care of that land. The gentleman in the middle, he may just enjoy being out in the wide open spaces, seeing lots of country. And this gentleman on the right is a hunter, and he's hunting the birds in the lower photo there, the bobwhite quail. You may not have many quail where you're at, but in the rolling plains of Texas, South Texas, some of the coastal prairies, there are still quail in huntable populations, and we hope that they can make a recovery and come back. Here in the lower left, I've got a photo of Steve Nelly fly fishing in a small pond in Llano County. We all have different uses, expectations, dreams for the land. And as long as we're doing it in a sustainable manner, life will be good. Now let's take a view of some different photos. This photo was taken in 2016. There were several major floods in Texas, and especially in the central Texas area in 2015 and 2016. This is Salado Creek in Bell County, and those floods can move some big timbers. Tragically, it changes the landscape quite a bit. Here, this young man is looking at Maximilian sunflower, and he's noticed that, hey, it is moved uphill out of the riparian area and it's spreading. So he's being observant. He's learning how to see the land and to read the land. And I'm pointing this stick at a plant here on the ground on the Burleson Prairie. This is Mickey Burleson right here, owner of the Burleson Prairie in Bell County. Right in front of me is a 6-foot tall compass plant, a very rare forb over lots of country nowadays. It's not as prevalent as it once was when Aldo Leopold wrote about fields, pastures where compass plant tickled the bellies of buffalo as they grazed. So we're trying to learn about the plants, learning what's going on out there. You can also be observant and just notice what caused this on a mesquite. Well, most likely a white-tailed buck, although it might have been another species, another buck of an exotic deer created this rub. And you can see they rub their antlers to get rid of the dried up covering. And now they've got hardened antlers under it this time of year. And if you're out at night, you might even get to see a screech owl. So again, take advantage of your land, daylight and the dark. Get out and see what's on the land. Here we've got conservation being applied to the land. We've got tree grubbing or tree dozing of juniper. Now, he's not using the blade of this dozer, he's using a grubber. You can see it hangs down below the bulldozer blade to grub out this redberry juniper, which will resprout if you don't get all the root out. But in reading the land, we need to look around and see what else is going on in this photo. Perhaps we do need to do some control of the juniper, but we may also need better grazing management. There's not a lot of grasses there present to be seen. So when we get through with the grubbing, perhaps range seeding would be in order as well to help bring back additional grasses and forbs. If you're going to do brush grubbing, mechanical work like this, get that cedar when it's small. It's never going to be as cheap as it is right now. Don't let it get to be 15 feet tall and have to try to clear it then. Here's a rock rake that can go on the front of a tractor or it can go on a skid steer. And people use these to pick up rocks in cropland fields, but it can also be used to, in effect, lift up entire plants of prickly pear. And take that now and stack it somewhere, pile it up in a gravel pit or somewhere where it cannot reach soil and continue to grow. It will dry out. You can burn them. They'll just melt away, but you don't want to let them root down again. Prescribed burning is a very useful practice. Look how thick this mesquite is. It's way too thick. Prescribed fire is probably not going to control that size mesquite, but it will control prickly pear that you can't even see because of the grass cover. And people ask, well, what about wildlife when you have these prescribed burns or wildfires? Well, look at this deer. It's getting the heck out of Dodge. Wildlife have coexisted with fire for eons. They know how to avoid it. The ones that move slow will go down in the ground, find a hole to go down, and they will survive it. Here's a ranch manager using a drip torch to light a fire. The wind is blowing to the right of the photo, so it is blowing. It's burning with the wind. This is a head fire, and we can't see a reason to be burning, but this is because of prickly pear, low growth of prickly pear that's in this photo. All right, now let's go and look at an aerial image of a spot I'm going to show you some photos of, but this is a photo that was taken prior to the wildfire season of 2011. In Texas, about 4.5 million acres of land burned in Texas because of the wildfires. It was dry in 2011, terribly bad year for wildfires. Now look at the mountain right here. It's kind of hard to see, that's a mountain, but all of that heavy brush, that's ash juniper. This is ash juniper all right here. This isn't a grassy opening. It's grass with scattered brush. You can see the scattered trees. So this was 2 years, 3 years actually, prior to the wildfire. And here we are. Here we are 1 year post burn. Look at the mountain. All those ash junipers are gone. They burned up when the wildfire came across. Now here's one little pocket of ash juniper that didn't get burned. Don't know what happened. There was a little road right here. So it might have been that a wind shift happened. The wind might have blew out of this away and the fire just kept or quit creeping that way. Don't know what happened. But look at the vegetation. All of these junipers here, mostly dead. This is in April. So all of this green in the grassland, this is either Texas wintergrass or it's Texas wintergrass in combination with some of the annual bromes, perhaps Japanese brome. It's too early for warm season grasses to be that green in mid-April. Now look, we're going to go on the ground and look right here where this blue star is. So here we are. It just, it top killed it. In fact, it totally killed ash juniper. When you burn off all the leaves, or just brown the leaves, they don't even have to burn off, just brown them, they will die. And what we've got happening is this is about 4 months, August of 2011, 4 months after the wildfire. Some mesquites are starting to sprout. I want to look at this tree right here with the broken over branch. So here it is, right here in front of it. Again, 4 months after the wildfire, pretty hot fire. Here's a western ragweed coming up from the rhizome. Here's some buffalo burr back here and here. And then there's mesquite behind this cedar. Notice this branch that's burned and fell over. Same thing happened here. This branch burned in half, fell over. Do you think we can find this same cedar 5 years later? Well, here it is in August of 11. Is that not the same cedar in September of 2016? It is. So what we've had happen, we did a little inventory of the plants. These are the plants that came back. One of the more unusual or uncommon grasses that we found out here was Texas cutgrass. And as thick as that juniper was, there's no telling how old the seeds were of that cutgrass that were in the soil and they came back. Back here, this is meadow dropseed. The ash juniper that was here, no telling how much seed is in the soil. So it may come back, but it's going to have to come back through a good turf of grass. The mesquite that was just little seedlings is now 6 to 8 feet tall, multi-stemmed. Plainleaf sumac has come back with a vengeance over a lot of this country. It comes back on those hills terribly strong. But that's what, the land will heal itself given time and good management, good grazing management. Give it time to heal. Here's another area. This is in Palo Pinto County. That was where that photo I just showed you was also Palo Pinto County. Over 50,000 acres of potential golden cheek warbler habitat burned in Palo Pinto County in 2011. This was prior to the golden cheek warbler being delisted by Fish and Wildlife Service. So we were still concerned about golden cheek warbler habitat. But what we noticed is that where you had the loss of mature ash juniper and hardwoods, well, the ash juniper is dead. It's gone out of this little area right here, but the oak trees burned completely up, but they root sprouted. And now we have transitioned this habitat with a wildfire from golden cheek warbler habitat, which was destroyed. But look at the trees. Now, this has made excellent black-capped vireo habitat because the vireos need these dense, shrubby, woody plants with a foliage apron all the way to the ground. They nest at doorknob height, a little over 3 feet off the ground. So this is perfect nesting habitat for the black-capped vireo. And we probably, for 40 and probably closer to 50 years, we will not have golden cheek warbler habitat back in this area. And in Palo Pinto County, this is the furthest known northern documented areas of golden cheek warblers nesting. So there are golden cheek warblers in this county. Another photo from 2011. Under good management, good grazing management, good stewardship, even in a drought year, we can have good grasses, good forbs, good woody plants, providing multi-benefits for livestock, wildlife, and now we think a lot more about pollinators. We have to be concerned with pollinators. We need to manage for them as well. I took this photo 2 counties south of that previous photo. This is in Coleman County during 2011. Drought year, there's a square bale of hay right here, or big round bale of hay. If you're that short of grass as this landowner is, buying hay to hold on to those animals is a futile exercise, because when it's this dry, no one has much hay to sell, and hay becomes $120, $150, $200 a bale, and it's going to take for this many animals a bale a day, and you can't feed your way through a drought. It's time to put wheels under these cows, and by that I mean put them in a trailer, take them to the sale barn. Your crop is not that cattle, but it's that land. So I'll talk about it. So we've got to take a discussion out on the land. We need to go out there, get with our people that are managing the land, owning the land, and talk about what we need to do to better manage this. Involve everyone that's on that ranch, because they all have a stake. You know, the guy over here that's running that bulldozer, he's the last person to see a tree before it's uprooted. So he needs to understand what we need to leave for good wildlife, good pollinator habitat, you know, so everybody's got to be involved. Sometimes you got to climb the mountain. We're going up on this hill. It's only about a 600-foot mountain, but in central Texas, that's considered a mountain. Notice we've got a pretty heavy wooded canopy on this steep adobe range site. Not a lot of vegetation on the ground because there's so much shade. And if you get out where there's a little bit of sun, here's a plant that has what looks like a thorn, but it's actually a modified branch. So this is a Bumelia shrub or tree, but it's being browsed pretty hard by wildlife. This ranch is high fenced. It's for 10 years or longer than 10 years. It's had no cattle. It has native white-tailed deer, axis deer, and black buck antelope. And they are impacting their growth. Even though this Bumelia came up from a seed between this rock and a grass that it's trying to hide from, those animals are impacting the health of this plant, keeping it turned into a bonsai tree instead of a healthy tree. Here's a plant that if you've got too many exotic deer or too many white-tailed deer, you can grow this plant because cattle don't eat it, wildlife don't eat it, and it's an excellent plant. American basket flower is an excellent plant for seed producers, for birds, and a great pollinator plant. Here's how it looks when it matures in midsummer, begins growth in late winter, flowers in April through June, and then matures the fruit seeds in July, August. And you can pull these seeds out even now, even in November. Go out there and find a plant, put the seed head between your middle finger and your index finger, and then take your thumb and just squish down into that seed head, and you can pop these seeds out. And they look like about the size of an annual sunflower seed, except they're black and shiny, have longitudinal ribs in the seed. And you can take these, scatter them out, and they will grow from seed. Wherever you plant these, you may have to scratch the ground every couple of years to, disturb the ground a little bit and allow these annual plants to germinate and grow. And when you can get a rancher to talking more about just cowgrass, show him that this forb, he says, I've seen my cattle eating that. What is that? Well, that's trailing rhatney. So cattle eat more than just grasses. Their diet's about 75% grass, 16% forbs, broadleaf weeds, and 9% shrubs, or the mast of shrubs. So they eat more than just grass. Take the time to dig up a plant and look at the roots. This is dotted gayfeather that has a rounded onion-like root called a corm. You cut it open and they'll be blackish to maroon in color, and they have layers kind of like an onion. And Mr. Haley here is looking at the seeds of Leavenworth Oringo. I'll show you that in just a minute. Look at the root of bush sunflower. Would you ever believe there'd be such a root below ground of this very desirable perennial forb? You can see the numerous years that this plant has sent up stems. So you can learn a lot about plants by digging one up, looking at the roots. I was with Mr. Haley one day, and we noticed up here on this prairie this white flower. We were about a quarter mile away and said, "What is that?" So we drove up there, and I said, "Well, this looks like late flowering boneset. It should be down near a riparian area." And he said, "Well, I've got a water line right here. I may have a leak." And sure enough, there was a leak there. And that this plant, how did the seed get there? The seed was already there. It was just needing to be have some moisture to come up. So get out, walk on the land, walk around, see what's happening. That's the best advice I can give you. I talk about overgrazing. I'm not disparaging ranchers and their job of raising cattle. We need to raise this beef because we cannot eat the grass. We can't digest it, but we can eat the flesh of the animals that can eat it. So we need grazing. We need good ranching and good management. So these cattle are moving in a blur. They've just been, a gate on the left's just been opened up, and they've been allowed to come into a fresh pasture, and they're anticipating that move. They know about how long they've been. About 4 hours is all they stay per pasture. And they know when it's time to move, and they start going to where the gates are, and they get to go to fresh grass. So we need to be observing and managing good land. So speaking to a livestock raiser, the importance to you of native grass production. And like I said, this may look like a lot of animals, and it is. There's about 5,000 stockers in this herd, and they are rotated as a one herd grazing system through multiple pastures, and the pastures are only 30 to 100 acres each, and they only stay about 4 hours per pasture. So they're going to rotate out, and this pasture won't look much different than what it does right now. But grass is the cheapest livestock feed you can raise. Don't feed hay 6 months out of the year. Raise grass and feed grass. And a rancher is in the grass raising business, not the livestock raising business. The rancher is using their livestock to harvest what their actual crop is, which is grass. A wheat farmer's crop is wheat. A rancher's crop is grass. And that's what they're managing for. And a rancher should be interested in the total pounds of beef produced and sold, not in the number of head of livestock they can have. Because sometimes, more often than not, with fewer animals, more food is left available, and those animals can choose more nutritious foods, and you will actually sell heavier weaning animals and make more money than if you were overstocked. Speaking to a deer rancher, the importance to you of native forb and browse, not grass, forb and browse production. Native plants are the cheapest deer feed you can raise. The cheaper and more productive than nearly anything you can pour out of a sack. You are in the habitat business first and the deer raising business second. You are interested in the quality of deer living on your land. You want big, healthy bucks like this. And you should be interested in the age ranges of bucks so that you have kind of like a bell curve of a small number of young deer, a large number of, mature deer, and then a decreasing number of overly mature deer, bucks. You need to understand the buck-doe ratio, the fawn crops, how many fawns are added to the herd each year. and the deer density in acres of land per deer. We need to understand stocking rate, so many acres per cow, and so many acres per deer as well. And for a deer rancher, livestock grazing is okay if it's done the proper way. Deer eat forbs and browse. Cattle eat predominantly grasses. So cattle and deer can coexist very well on the same habitat. Deer and goats eat basically the same thing, so they're competitors for the same food. Sheep and deer, a little less competitive, and cattle are the best. They eat totally different diets, so that's what we need. If you're going to manage the land, try to have some cattle as well as the deer. Speaking to a quail manager, the importance of native plant production. Native bunch grasses, basketball-sized clumps of grass. Think of little blue stem, a basketball-sized clump of little blue stem or something equivalent is the best nesting cover you can grow. And you're in the native plant managing business. Many of you hopefully have run into Dr. Dale Rollins, retired extension wildlife specialist. His favorite saying is to know your plants and know how to manipulate them for whatever species you're managing for. And as a quail manager, you're interested in nesting cover, that bunch grass, basketball-sized bunch grass, brooding cover, screening cover like broom weeds, or they're like walking in a pecan grove to a quail compared to us walking in a pecan grove, walking under broomweed. So that's brooding cover, screening cover, loafing cover, the shrubs, browse that they can hide in during the middle of the day, roosting cover, openings that they spend the night in a circle, an escape cover. How can they avoid predators? So you're needing all of these types of cover types. And livestock grazing is okay as long as you don't overgraze, especially the nesting cover, then it's good. Turkey manager, importance to you of native plant production. Native bunch grasses, the best nesting cover you can grow. A turkey hen would like to have some brush on her backside and tall grasses in front of her to have her nest. So she looks for a slightly different area than a quail does. And again, a turkey manager is in the native plant managing business, a diversity of hard mast. Think of oaks, acorns, hickories, walnuts, pecans, soft mast, bromeliad, plums, things like that. We need these different woody plants. And you're interested in these different types of cover, nesting, brooding, screeding, roosting. Now we're roosting up in trees with turkeys and escape cover. And again, livestock grazing is okay if it's done the proper way. You're a honey producer. Native flowering plants are the best pollen and nectaring plants you can grow. You're in the plant managing business. Here's Texas kidneywood, excellent pollinator plant, excellent wildlife plant. A diversity of flowering plants for pollinators, native or exotic pollinators, needed during the spring, summer, and fall when these pollinators are most active. And again, livestock grazing is okay if it's done in a land stewardship proper way. What are the common themes among all these different land users? The need for and use of native plants for food and cover. We don't need to introduce exotic plants. They sometimes, become monocultures that are deserts for wildlife. The need for diversity in plant types based on the species you're managing for. Again, diversity of plants is always a good thing. The need to know your plants and know how to manage these plants, how to manipulate the plants. The need for flowering nectar plants during 3 seasons of the year. And that all of it together comes in to show that overgrazing hurts all of the land users, especially pollinators. Drought hurts pollinators, overgrazing hurts pollinators because now cattle are forced to eat some of the forbs that would be flower producing nectar and pollen, and now those flowers are gone because of overgrazing. But again, it's okay. Grazing is okay if it's done the proper way. Now I'm going to share with you some photo points that I took over a 10-year photo in Shackford County, northeast of Abilene. I set the rainfall data here so that that you could see what happened. And we're interested in the time period when I took the first photos in 2011 all the way through 2020. But let's kind of look, I backed it up to 2008 to show you that the 3 years prior were just sort of average rainfall around this 25-inch mark. But in 2011, they had only 15 inches of rain, a record drought, record low number for drought. 2012, 20 inches, 5 inches below normal. 2013, 3 inches below normal. 2014, 6 inches below normal. So 2011 to 14, 4 consecutive back-to-back drought years. But look what happened in 2015. And you probably had this same high rainfall on your place as well. 42 inches of rainfall fell where normally they would have 25 inches. And then it was followed up by 2016 having almost as much rain, 39 inches. So it had back-to-back record rainfalls, 2015 and 16. And then 2017, 18, 19, and 20 were above average rainfalls, including one really good year above average. So let's look at this little photo point. And the backstory on why I started taking these photos, in the summer of 2011, I was asked to come to Albany, Shafford County, and give a presentation to a group of ranchers, wildlife managers, on what had happened to the quail. Why don't we have any quail? Shafford County used to be one of the best quail hunting counties there was, and now we don't have any quail. And I didn't know at that time, no one really knew what had happened to the quail. This was before research had begun to identify the Sika worm, which the Sika worm lives in the Sika, a part of the small intestine of the quail, sucking nutrients away from the quail. And this was before we learned about eye worms, which are eaten. Well, the host plant for the eye worms are crickets, roaches, and some grasshoppers. And so the quail eat these bugs. The eggs of these eye worms hatch out. They travel in the quail and get to the eye and form a little worm that's about a 1/4 inch long. And it's less than the diameter of a toothpick. It's more like a needle. And think about having 25, 50, 100 of these worms in your eye, around your eyeball, and you're a 6-inch tall bird and you're scratching at your eyes, you're calling attention to yourself, and it affects your vision. So, this, in addition to loss of habitat on some properties, is one of the reasons quail numbers have decreased. But in 2011, no one knew this. So my presentation was basically going to be based on the fact that as I drove around these counties, I knew that in 2011, there wasn't the grass cover that there had been in previous years. So I went to the field office in Albany, and I went through their collection of slides. They've got notebooks of old slides, 35mm slides taken in the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s. In the 2000s, they got digital cameras. But as I look through these slides, they may have taken a photo to show a new fence or a new water trough. But in the background of the photo, you could look and see grass, bunch grasses, tall grasses. And I said, well, that's what I'm going to build my presentation on, is that somehow we have lost these grasses. And as I came from Weatherford toward Shafford County, when I hit the county line between Breckenridge and Albany, I stopped and reset my odometer and went 1 mile. I took a photo on the roadside, walked up the fence, took a photo. Went 2 miles west, went to the south side of the road, took a photo, 2 more miles, north side photo. I did that for 6 photo points. This is photo point number 5. And it kind of became the most interesting one that I took. But what you can see in 2011, it's dry. In September, the grasses did not even green up. There's a cow trail right here that's kind of haired over. You can't see it, but there's a cow trail there. Here's a flat rock that's got a red stain. I guess it's a lichen or an algae on it. It looks like a long-handled skillet. Look at this prickly pear. It's going to be in the photos. Again, I wasn't interested in anything but the grass, showing that if you look in this photo, there are no basketball-sized clumps of grass to be seen. So we're going to go through time. Here's September of 11. I almost forgot. I didn't go back in September, but I did go in November of 12. Took the same photo. Here's the rock. There's the skillet. There's the prickly pear beginning to grow a little bit. Cattle are in the pasture now. We're in the second year of a 3-year drought. Cattle are still here. Notice a few broomweeds present. Well, in January of 2012, they received an inch of rain in one event and 2 inches in another event a few weeks later, and that germinated the broomweeds. And people thought, well, maybe the drought's over, but it was not to be. The drought was going to continue. But we're still in hard times, very little green to be seen. 2013, we're starting to see a little bit of rainfall. Here's some 3-on, white tridents right here. This short grass out here is curly mesquite. But look at here's the rock. Look at the prickly pear, how much it has grown. Also call your attention to underneath this mesquite. Look at the green grass. But look out here in the open, hot, sun-baked areas. The grass is not as thick nor as green. Well, this mesquite is a lagoon that has roots that go down very deep. Some say as deep as 30 feet. It is bringing moisture up to the plant. When those leaves fall on the ground every year, they get in, they become organic matter, go back into the soil. The grasses are able to use the nutrients, and they get a little shade during this hot drought every day. So it's not as sun-baked as it is out here in the open. So there it is in 13. Here it is in 14. Look at the prickly pear. It's making tunas. It's reproducing. It's making fruit now. The grass is still fairly green under this mesquite. A little less grass. It's starting to dry over here. Starting to die out. So the drought was still, this was just a 19-inch rainfall year, so still not getting a lot of rain. Sand drop seed showed up right here in the photo. We go from 14 to 15. Remember, that's the year with 42 inches. Now, to a rancher, this is not a good year. They got a lot of rain, but it grew broomweeds. But to a quail manager, quail hunter, a good broomweed year is a good quail year. Think about that broomweeds, 18, 24 inches tall, single stem, bushes out like a pecan tree. Quail can walk under that and be protected from hawks and predators. So this was a good broomweed year, 2015. Here's 2016, 39 inches, another good broomweed year. I have to confess to a trespass here because I couldn't see the prickly pear. I crawled under the fence. I don't crawl over fences anymore, but I crawled under the fence, hung the camera on the T-post, walked up there to where the prickly pear was, and I pulled the stems of the broomweed out of the way, back to the rock. So there's the prickly pear in 2016 without the broomweeds. Here's 2017. Now we're back to normal rainfall, 26 inches. We're getting grass back. This is following those 2 record rainfall years. Now, what happened to the broomweed? It didn't rain exactly right for the broomweeds in 17. We needed rain in the fall, just like for bluebonnets, to germinate the seed of the broomweed. And we needed rain in the spring to bulk the broomweeds up. And we didn't get that. So even though we made hundreds of pounds of seed per acre over those 2 years, that broomweed is biding its time till it gets the right rainfall and can come back. But now notice the prickly pear still growing. The grass has come back. It's pretty healthy. 2018, cattle are back in the pasture because the cow trail's freshened up. Look at the prickly pear here. 2019, lots of grass, but not necessarily basketball-sized clumps. This is almost too thick for quail to walk through as well. And it's still not the right size, right type of grass for quail. 2019, making a few prickly pear tunas. 2020, now I'm going to go back to 19. This grass right here is native grasses. But in 2020, a introduced cool season annual grass called Japanese brome exploded over much of the rolling plains, the cross timbers, into the panhandle of the state of Texas, maybe into the Edwards Plateau as well. This Japanese brome just exploded. And so what we're seeing, that grayish fine stem look, that's Japanese brome. Now, I was a little bit disappointed in 2020 when I walked up and looked at this. I had to climb under the fence again, go up there and look, and something had gotten in there and destroyed part of the plant and rooted it up and removed about half the pads. And I'll show you what happened later. But you can see some recent rooting here. This was older rooting because the grass had grown back over the damage. But let's go back and look at what an enlargement of the photo from 2011 showed the prickly pear. I didn't count the prickly pear pads in 11 because I wasn't interested. I was looking at grass. But I can count about 8 pads here in 11. Here it is in 2014. Now, this is an enlargement of that photo. So it actually increased by 55 pads in 3 years. That's how prickly pear can get away from you if you're not looking and walking out over your land. And it grew these pads in 3 of the record drought years, low rainfall. It increased to 63 pads. And I put these arrows here just to show you the width of the plant. In 2014, it was about 6 feet of width of that plant. So here it is in 15. I pulled the broomweeds back, took a photo. It added a few more pads. It's up to 85 pads now. It's making lots of tunas. But in 16, the pad number actually went down 1 pad. I might have miscounted a pad, but it went from 85 down to 84. And look at this, it's kind of got a yellowing around the margin of the pads. It's, certainly looks sick down here, yellow. So I called the field office in Albany and I asked them to check with the rancher, see if they sprayed this pasture for prickly pear. And in about 3 days, they called me back and said the rancher told them, yes, they sprayed this pasture the winter of 2015, the first 2 months of 2016. But he said they didn't know if they sprayed this particular plant because it was close to the road and they might not have gotten to it. I said, well, it looks sick to me. I think it was sprayed. I've got 6 years of photos taken here. So I guess I'll get another couple of years of a dying prickly pear plant in photos, but that was not to be. Because here it is in 16. Here it is in 17. Notice that the green color has come back. The pads are getting plumper. Look how much thicker they are in 18. It's making a single tuna now in 18. Here it is in 19, making several tunas and getting very broad. It's over 6 feet this way and about 5 feet this way. Here it is in 2020. Now, this is all that Japanese brome. You can see the seed heads. And here it is shrunk down from this big plant in 19 to being only about 4 feet by 3 feet, 3.5 feet. So wild hogs got in there and rooting around, dislodged the pads and ate the pads and the roots. So I want to summarize this part of it. Look at this publication. You can go and find this as a PDF on the internet. Daryl Eckert, he's a retired extension range specialist from San Angelo. He wrote a publication called Prickly Pear Ecology. And he did studies in several counties, replicated studies around San Angelo, where he would go into a pasture, break off prickly pear pads, drop them on the ground, do it several times, several counties. And he went back in 1 year and he found those same pads and he noticed that the pad he broke and dropped was alive and it had a pad growing on it. So it had 2 pads. Went back in another year, 4 pads. And that's exactly what I was seeing right here, because in 2011, I estimated that it had 8 pads. By 2014, exponentially, it should have had 64 pads, and I counted 63. All of that remarkable growth during those drought years. And then in 2015 and 16, notice that the pad growth slowed down. It actually decreased 1 in 16, and in 17, it really hadn't picked back up. And That was during the wetter periods. So the only thing I can think of what maybe caused that plant to slow down growth was almost 80 inches of rainfall in those 2 wet years saturated the soil, and the prickly pear was under stress. It was getting too much water and it stressed it out. Only thing I can attribute it to. But notice as we went back to normal rainfall, slightly above average rainfall, the pad growth went back to growing, 86 to 93 to 103, and then down to 59 because of that damage. So is prickly pear always a bad thing? Here we can see, following a wildfire, bush sunflower beginning to come up because it was in the prickly pear plant, because maybe on an overgrazed place, that's the last place you'll find these desirable forbs, is up in the prickly pear where the animals cannot get to it. But these vertical pads of prickly pear, even though they're dead, they were acting like a living silt fence. Notice this fine material right here, the sand, silts, and clays. It caught that sediment as it was washing to the right in this photo and captured it right there. Notice that over here, we don't see the fine materials, coarse gravels. Same thing in this photo. The water was going from the bottom of the photo to the top, and the living prickly pear pads caught the sediment and held on to quite a bit of soil. And now those pads are able to grow very desirable Indian grass plants and other grasses. Here's a test you can do with prickly pear. You can do this on a 100,000 acre ranch, or you can do it in your flower bed. There's no place too small that you can test this. Find a couple of prickly pear pads, break them off the plant, drop them both on the ground, just like you see here. In a month, you'll have to take a sharpshooter or a stick, because you won't be able to just flip it over with your foot, and pry that plant out of the ground, because it is going to be rooted in 1 month. Now, the thorns do not become roots, but the roots originate from the base of the thorns. And now that second pad, wait another month and turn it over, and you'll see it's even harder to get out of the ground. So every time you do brush management, you break up prickly pear clumps, you drop them on the ground, they're going to root. If you shred prickly pear and you shred and it leaves a half to a third of a pad and it falls on the ground, it will root. So be careful with your brush work. You need to pick up those prickly pear pads. Being observant when you're out on the land is a great trait. You've got to learn to look. Steve sent me these photos. What is this? Is this a tuna or is this a pad of prickly pear? Well, it's both, because this was a flower. This is where the flower was. So this is a tuna. He cut it open and it had seeds. I asked him, sent him an email back and said, did you gather any seeds up? Be interested to know if this would breed true. And he said, no, he didn't think about that, but it would have been an interesting observation. So that was just by looking. Same way with this. Look at this tuna. It should fall away, but it didn't fall away and stayed on this pad, and it grew a pad. That's very unusual to see. So be observant when you're out and about taking these photos. I worked with a rancher in Abilene, and he had some mountain country that he had goats on it, cattle and deer. And this was shin oak right here. And I said, let me bring a cage and let's put a cage around one of these 3 shin oaks. And let's see how much shin oak browse is being utilized by your animals. So we put this out in the summer of 95, went back out there in August of 96, took this photo. And he said, that's impressive. He said, I make more money from my deer hunting and my cattle. I think I'm going to sell my goats, which was a good thing because it allowed more of this vegetation to be available for the deer and occasionally by a cow. And I'd already left Abilene in the spring of 03, so I called the guys in the field office and told them where this was, get with the rancher, see if you can go out there and take a photo, and they sent it to me. So here it is about, 7, 8 years later. The browse on this middle tree has almost filled the cage, and there's still quite a bit of browse being produced outside the cage, but it's being used by the animals, by the deer. So these grazing or browsing exclosure cages are very useful. You can do one on Spanish oak as well. But anywhere you put one, you need to have one species of the same tree outside the cage, one inside the cage, so that you can measure how much browse is actually being utilized off these basal sprouts. Now let's go back to
Ricky,
yes.
just a time check for you. We are just a little bit over an hour.
Okay.
I just want to let you know that.
All right. I think we're summing it up here.
All right.
Thank you for that. So we're going to look back at stewardship now. A deeply held inner conviction that motivates landowners and managers to take good care of the land, not merely for personal gain, but for future generations and the benefit of society. So land stewardship is by definition voluntary. Again, no one makes you overgraze the land nor take good care of it. We often talk about stewards as being caretakers, conservationists, husbandry, custodians of the land. Rob Haley here is a custodian of the land. He's looking at the fruits of this Leavenworth Oringo. And if you look at it, the seeds almost look like dinosaur seeds. They've got scales, straws on the back of the seeds, very unusual. We're in a little bit of a rainstorm now. Let's look at how water ties in with land stewardship. This fence is just a 48-inch tall net wire fence, sheep and goat fence, not a deer-proof fence, but apparently it's a little blue stem proof fence because on this side, this landowner doesn't have any little blue stem. So two different ownerships on either side of the fence, two different ways of looking at the land. And that's important because water knows no ownership boundaries. When the raindrop falls, when a drop falls over here, it's got to slide down the stems of the grass, go through the litter, the mulch, finally get to the soil and be absorbed. Very little runoff. Whereas over here, from 2/3 to 75% of the rain that you get is going to run off. It's going to hit the ground, explode in a little raindrop, take some of the soil with it, and we lose that topsoil. Now, a famous Texan said this statement years ago: saving the water in the soil must start where the first raindrop falls. This was said by a rancher, a Texan, Lyndon Johnson, 36th president of the United States. So not only in the riparian areas, but in the uplands, we've got to be concerned about where the water is falling. So now let's talk about this relationship of reading the land, land stewardship, and water, and it not being a new concept. Think about when this happened. How far back in time do you think this was? Was it the drought of the 30s, when the European settlers first came to Texas, or when was this? In the primitive state of the land, the mountains and hills were covered with soil, and there was abundance of timber. The plains were full of rich earth, bearing an abundance of food for cattle. Moreover, the land reaped the benefit of the annual rainfall, having abundant supply of water in all places, receiving the rainfall into herself, storing it in the soil. The land let off the water into the hollows, which it absorbed from the heights, providing everywhere abundant fountains and rivers. Such was the state of the country, which was cultivated by true husbandmen who made husbandry their business and had a soil the best in the world and an abundance of water. So when do you think this was? How far back in time do we have to go? Well, this was a description of ancient Greece. And the key points that Plato described, they had good soil, good timber, grasslands, water, and good stewardship. But then he also wrote, in comparison of what then was, there now remain only the bones of the wasted body. All the richer and softer parts of the soil have fallen away. A single night of excessive rain now washes away the earth and lays bare the rock. Now the land is losing the water, which flows off the bare earth into the sea, which reveals a lapse in stewardship. Something happened that changed the way they were taking care of the land, resulting in a loss of vegetation, loss of soil, and a degradation of their waters. So the role of land stewardship on private rangelands, just like Aldo Leopold said, conservation is sometimes paved with good intentions, which prove to be futile and even dangerous because they are devoid of critical understanding of the land or of economic land use. We've got to understand how we work and fit in with the land. And I gave you this quote earlier. The land is to be loved and respected as an extension of ethics. A land ethic reflects the existence of an ecological conscience, and this in turn reflects the conviction of individual responsibility for the health of the land. And the landscape of any farm is the owner's portrait of themselves. You can see pride in their eyes in that farm right there. So how can we motivate landowners to become better land stewards? Education, encouragement, assistance, technical assistance, incentive. Y'all have certainly earned a great education through the Master Naturalist program to go out and work with people. This ranch had a tour. They don't have roads on the ranch for vehicles. Had to bring in UTVs to tour, but that was a way to get people out on the land. Even out in far west Texas, 9 inches of rainfall. We've got to manage the land, talk about things, take care of it. And if you're a good land steward, there will be a pot of gold at the end of the rainbow. So I'll ask you, do you have love, respect, and admiration for the land? This family, husband, wife, 3 daughters, were the landowners. The husband sadly passed away young, but the family still had love, respect, and admiration for the land. This is out around Fort Stockton, 9 inches of rainfall, excellent grass cover for that country. They are definitely stewards of the land. How well do you understand your land? Look in the background. There's been some brush push, some cedar, but this person's gotten out of the truck and they're looking at seeing plants that they've not seen before. How well do you understand your land? An old saying is that the best fertilizer for a piece of land is the footprints of the owner. What kind of portrait does your land paint of you? And it's a different way of looking at the land. We got to remember the Hugh Hammond Bennett statement. This is a statement that's in your book, your Master Naturalist book by J.E. Weaver. Nature is an open book for those who care to read. Each grass-covered hillside is a page in which is written the history of the past, conditions of the present, and the predictions of the future, which is what we're able to see if we learn to read the land and develop this stewardship ethic. So I'm sorry for running over. I get sometimes carried away in my philosophizing here, but I do believe in being a good steward and helping people to become better stewards. So thank you for your time, and I'll stop sharing here and turn it back over to you.
Thank you, Ricky. I love how you took it upon yourself to incorporate some of our curriculum in it too. So just applause for both you and Steve for this presentation.
Thank you.
There's so many great comments in the chat thanking you for the presentation and that it's a much needed topic. One of the questions we've got a couple times is everyone has asked if you would share your slides, if your slides would be available to share with them.
Would the recording work? Or
I believe
Yes,
so.
the recording will work.
Yeah.
And then the other question I saw in the chat was if you have time for one question.
Yes.
If a landowner that has been overgrazing land for a long time has a change of mind and changes their management practices for the benefit of the landscape, how many years might they expect to see noticeable positive changes to the landscape?
Well, the land didn't decrease in its value in just a year or two, so it's not going to heal itself in a year or two. But in a year or two, you will see changes. But I would say it's going to take 5 to 10 years to see significant changes. But if overgrazing is a problem in a riparian area, say, you fence off the riparian area, within 2 growing seasons, you'll see an abundance of woody plant seedlings come up. They were coming up all along, but the cattle and the deer were eating them. So you'll see results in as little as 2 years. Just don't give up. Grow with it. Grow with the vegetation each year as you learn, and you'll be amazed at how it will heal itself.
I have one more question, Michelle, if you'll humor me. This is actually a question, Ricky, that I had for you. And with all of your variety of different pictures and scenarios and examples, and I had to write this question down, but how do we avoid negatively stereotyping all of our agricultural producers or our ranching landowners or land? How do we avoid negatively stereotyping landowners in Texas for the mismanagement by a few?
Well, that can apply to slob hunters in the hunting world. You know, it's just a few. But if we can call out and show examples of good management, I think that goes a long way to help people learn, well, hey, what I'm doing is not right. They don't have to tell me I'm not doing right. I can see it. And we've got so many new people coming to Texas, moving here that don't understand the weather and the climate and our range sites, eco sites. Um, you know, finding a mentor is one way. Find someone in the community that's a good rancher, steward, good wildlife manager, if that's what you're looking at. Talk to them. Again, if you've got 5 or 10 acres, you can't have one animal on it for a full year without supplemental feed. So it takes one cow, say maybe a goat or two, but not one cow. So we've got to do it in a correct manner to not offend them and make them not want to adopt good management. But really, it's just showing them, uh, you know, with education, outreach, field tours, things like that, that they can see, well, this is what I need to be doing differently, and I can change with maybe adding some fences, even if it's just temporary fences. I can do better with my management.
Great.
One last question, Ricky. If people want more information or have more questions, what are some resources they could go to?
Oh, well, the different chapters in the Master Naturalist Handbook are great. Um, Sand County Almanac is very good. The Texas Wildlife Association has a monthly magazine that has very good stewardship articles. Steve Nelly has a monthly article on lessons from Leopold in the magazine. So Texas Southwest Cattle Raisers, that would be a source for the livestock industry. Get with the Natural Resources Conservation Service, the Soil and Water Conservation Districts in your county, Texas Parks and Wildlife, AgriLife Extension research people. Go to field days, go to their meetings, and you can learn a lot about other sources that are really local to your area. Because what they talk about in the Panhandle is different than what they talk about on the coastal prairie, but the basics are still the same. But the way you apply them may be a little different because of rainfall and weather. So,
and then look at those good land stewards in your areas that have diverse pastures and have managed their land with the resources in mind that you want to share as your goals for your property as well. I think that's a great kind of tie back to what you were just talking about as well. Looking to those
96% of Texas being privately owned, we can't get on many places unless we're invited as a guest or go on a tour. So try to find those tours and go see those good places. They're not going to take you to an overgrazed place. They're going to take you to a good managed place, and you'll see good management on the ground.
Wonderful. Ricky, thank you so much for a fantastic presentation today.
Thank
We
y'all
really
for letting me
appreciate
come.
all of your support for the Master Naturalist program and always being the biggest advocate for what our chapters are doing at their local level.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Ricky.
Thank y'all.
And then with that, we're done with our